This is Ava, and this is my husband, Dan. Today we are doing something special where we are going to be interviewing Dan because he also had Pierre Robin Sequence when he was a baby. And I know a lot of times people have questions for adults who have had PRS. So we thought we would take some of your questions that you guys came up with and ask Dan the questions. So first of all, I would actually like him to tell you a little bit more about his story, and then we'll get into the more detailed questions.
Okay. As Jenna said, when I was born, I had Pierre Robin Sequence, which is the same thing Ava had. But unlike our situation, when we knew ahead of time that she had this, in my parents' case, they had no idea until I was born. And when I was born, I had swallowed my tongue, I was blue, I wasn't breathing, and the only thing that my mom knew was that they took me out of the room, and my dad had to go trail after to find out what was going wrong with their baby. So it was a scary way to find out, and I ended up being in the neonatal intensive care unit at the hospital for almost a month. Because unlike today, where we've got different types of bottles and feeding options that make it possible for Ava to be fed at home, and it is a fairly easy transition, that wasn't a situation that worked in my case, and I had to be fed using bottles that they were figuring out at the time, cutting different types of holes or slits in the nipple with a razor blade and trying to use G-tube feeding options, and all of this was technically a little bit trickier than even what we have to deal with. So my parents weren't allowed to take me home until they could do that to the satisfaction of the nurse and medical staff. Mm-hmm. But once they got me home, it was a parenting experience.
Well, but what else related to PRS did you have after you got out of the hospital? Because that wasn't the end of your journey.
Because I was born with a cleft palate and got frequent ear infections, I ended up having ear tubes put in, and several times put in, and they rejected the ear tubes the first time, put another set in, rejected those, and then at about a year old, I got my cleft palate repaired. But because of the ear tube rejection, there was actually holes in my eardrum that had to be repaired when I was a teenager. And so I was not completely done with surgery related to PRS until my teens.
Right. So you had the palate repair, and then you also had to have some speech therapy and some dental work as well, correct?
Yep. Because of the lower jaw being smaller, there was some crowding in my lower jaw teeth, and that provided a reason to actually get orthodontia, to get braces.
Did you have to have a jaw distraction at all?
No, I was not having to have that.
Okay, and you said you were blue when you were born. Mm-hmm. Did you have any other breathing issues?
Not that my parents have told me. I don't think so.
Okay. Okay, so another question that we got when we kind of asked the community about what we should ask Dan is just if there were any other histories of PRS in your family, and is it a genetic abnormality or a fluke? Because obviously Ava has PRS as well.
I was the first case of Pierre Robin in my family that they were aware of, so the fact that Ava has it, we don't know. It seems kind of like, she's got your nose. Mm-hmm. It seems kind of like she got it from me, but when we got our genetic testing, they didn't tell us that it was something they currently can track and test for.
Yes.
So that they may just not know what it is that I gave her.
Well, and I mean, Genetics is complicated and interesting, and
Yeah.
you know, it's kind of like if she got my nose, she got your chin, and that's as much as we know. But because of that, I believe that any of our future children, if we are lucky enough to have any more, have about a 50-50 chance, as Dan is half of the genetic makeup. So, all right. So we have more questions about speech. So I know you mentioned you went to speech therapy. The question was, did you overcome difficulties? Do you still have speech difficulties? How challenging was it to speak with good pronunciation?
Yes, I did have speech therapy, and that was something that was both through the school system, but also, and I should mention, the medical team that helped my parents get through the process of raising me and advising on what needed to be done was actually a team through the University of Minnesota, headed by Dr. Mueller, who's now retired. But they were, my understanding, one of the initial team-based approaches in dealing with this. So I got to go once a year to the University of Minnesota and spend a day with the team and get tested for my hearing, do speech testing.
Was that more than what was standard? Do you have any idea, like, at the time?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Just because it was tied to the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, and there were grad students that were trying things out and learning from what we were seeing. They were actually able to use some of the data they collected during those visits to provide teaching materials.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Do you still have any speech difficulty?
Yeah, it may not, I mean, it's probably obvious by this point. I still have some hypernasality when I speak, and it is something that I have some control over. If I get really tired, it's worse. And I have gotten some speech therapy to know that there are muscles back there that I can, if I have the ability to focus on them, I can try to close them up a little bit. But I still have partial closure. It's not full closure.
Was that intentional, or why does that happen?
I don't think it was intentional, but it's a tricky balance. And I know today I've seen comments on the PRS groups that there will occasionally be multiple surgeries to try to get that balance correct, because you don't want too much palate material back there, but you don't want too little, and so trying to get that just right number is sometimes tricky.
Okay.
And I don't know if they just didn't know about that back then. It was just, it is what it is. I have no idea.
All right. Was it a challenge to speak with good pronunciation, or do you not have memory of that?
Oh yeah, definitely a challenge. I know both in speech therapy, when I was in school, I had to practice, especially with pronouncing consonants, the p, t, d, that kind of stuff, without making it all like through my nose to pronounce it correctly.
Okay. The next question is, what things do you find difficult to do? Anything now, or?
I mean, I'm fully functional adult.
Okay, that's good. Okay. No, sorry, it was just part of the question. So,
Sure.
And I think you kind of answered this because you mentioned that you've had the surgeries on your ears. So they wanted to know, have you had to do other surgeries, or were there any specific surgeries that were more helpful than others?
So yeah, I did have the ear surgeries, and because of those surgeries, I ended up having a little bit of minor hearing loss on the upper frequency spectrum, but everything in the, people talking at you spectrum, it's not a problem.
Okay. Do you have any sleep apnea?
I probably snore, but no worse than that.
Okay. Okay. Someone also said that they have heard that adults who have had Pierre Robin as a child also have some vision, hearing problems. You answered the hearing problems. And then also some weakened muscles or joints. Have you had any of that with your PRS?
Not in my case.
Okay, so it's just the hearing issues.
Right.
Do you feel like having Pierre Robin Sequence has held you back in any way?
In general, no. I think it may have made growing up a little bit challenging in some ways, but by the time I'm now an adult, I don't feel like it's holding me back now at all.
Okay. What, maybe you want to expand on what stuff as a child was more difficult?
Bullying and teasing. Kids see somebody that acts different or looks different, and their response when I was growing up was to ask me why I sounded that way and to tease me for sounding different. Yeah.
And that's still, just from our conversations, I know it can stick with you sometimes.
Yes. As the current anti-bullying campaigns will no doubt explain, bullying will stick with you for years.
Does it affect your confidence at all now?
It's something I'm still self-conscious about. And I know, like for instance, speaking at a vocal volume loud enough for the room to hear is something that I have to consciously try to do, because I stopped trying to speak loudly because people kept teasing me about my voice. So it became easier just to be quiet.
Do people still comment on your voice as an adult?
Not unless they're being rude.
Okay, that's fair. Well, because I don't notice it at all really anymore. Like, I forget sometimes that there's any nasality. You just sound like Dan to me, so.
Well, good.
Right. Okay. What do you wish you had known or that someone had told you sooner about PRS?
Regarding me or her?
Answer how you choose, because that's how it was worded in the question.
I wish I had known that my experience might not be the exact, like intellectually I knew it wasn't necessarily going to be exactly the same as Ava's, but emotionally I think I had thought, okay, this is my experience. Ava is only getting half of that because you're fine, and it can't be any worse, but she's her own little person, and she did have some complications that I didn't have to deal with, and that was, I think, something that I wish I had really processed sooner so that I could be, able to deal with it, yeah.
Okay. Are there any treatments available to Ava now that you wish you had had access to?
I'm sure we're still finding out about what they've learned medically in the last 30 years. I mean,
Well, even the bottles, right?
Yeah, because like I had said earlier, the feeding was such an effort and a trial for my parents. You know, talk about no sleep as a new parent. They would have maybe 45 minutes after finishing one feed and then have to start the next one.
Yeah.
So those kinds of things.
Well, and I don't know about you, but because of Dan's experience, I was expecting Ava to be in the NICU for at least a couple weeks, like several days. And so the fact that the feeding for Ava went so well, and that she had the bottle option and took to the bottle right away was amazing.
Right.
It was totally different than I expected. What has been the most difficult thing in this whole process in regards to PRS for you?
Being a parent who had PRS and knowing what that experience is when you get older, and then seeing my daughter have it is hard as a parent, because I know that it's going to be difficult for her in some ways. And so still being a present parent, not getting caught in my own fear about what she might have to deal with in the future, and just trying to do the best thing for her, I think is one of the challenges.
Yeah, okay. Along those lines, what are you most afraid of from what you went through in regards to what Ava might have to go through?
I hope she doesn't get teased for how she sounds, and I think a lot of hope in that area, because 30 years of medical advances, I think she is going to be in a way a little bit easier because she's female, and it's not as big a problem to be somewhat nasal if you're female, at least in our culture.
Yeah.
So I think she'll be fine though. She's been such a fighter, and always this happy baby. I love her.
Even when she's teething.
Yeah. You go get it. That's right. So I think she'll be okay.
Yeah. Do you have any advice or words of wisdom, I guess, for parents that are going through it? Like, I don't know if some hope for on the other side, I guess. Like,
you will be okay. It will be okay.
Dan turned out really well. Because I can say it because I'm his wife. He can't say it.
I turned out okay.
Yeah.
And I do want to take the moment to... I have the experience of going through it, and therefore I can rely on that to let you know that it's going to be okay, and to be a parent for Ava. My parents didn't have that, and I can't imagine how difficult it must be if you're also a parent of a new first-time PRS, child. It will be okay. You will be okay. It's okay.
Right.
I don't know how many other ways I can say that. You will get through it. It will have times where it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be the funnest time of being a parent, and it's going to challenge you in ways that you hadn't thought you would be challenged. But it's going to come out all right at the end of it.
Well, and I mean, if you get a Dan out of this, right? Then you're doing pretty good.
Thanks, honey.
You're welcome. Okay. If you guys have any other questions, you can type them below and put them in the comments, and we will try to answer the best we can. Hopefully that was informative. It is still a learning process. It has been obviously 30 years since Dan's experience, so in some ways this is learning all over again, and I think it is different to experience it as a child going through it versus experiencing it as a parent. So in that way, we are in a similar boat to all of you guys. Thank you for following the vlog, and we will be back again next week. We haven't decided quite yet what we're gonna do yet, but hopefully it'll be something fun. And thank you again for all the support for Ava's last surgery. That was so helpful. And thanks to Dan for making an appearance on the vlog today. All right, have a good day, guys.